Hi everyone, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and are enjoying your holidays. Just a quick warning, this is an extremely controversial topic. It's also very dark and heavy, so much so that I had to stop a few times while translating. As such, viewer discretion is advised and I would only recommend watching this video if you're interested in how Japan's death penalty works. That's enough from me for now. Take a deep breath and let's get started. On July 26, 2022, an execution was carried out at a correctional facility in Katsushika City, Tokyo. The prison, which is operated by the Ministry of Justice, is one of 7 detention centers that carry out executions in Japan. It's used to detain people awaiting trial, convicted felons, and those sentenced to death. The prison officers, through their experience of years of working there, were mentally prepared for this day. About 2 weeks prior to this execution being carried out, on July 8th, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated. He was speaking at a political event outside Yamato Saidaiji Station in Nara Prefecture when he was shot with an improvised firearm by 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami. The officers all know that an execution will most likely be carried out if a major case that shocks an entire nation, if not the world, occurs. On December 21, 2021, 3 prisoners were executed. This occurred after people were murdered on a train. Having nowhere to escape, they were stabbed to death and lit on fire. It happened again on August 6th on the Odakyu train line and on October 31st on the Keio train line. The officers asked each other who would be executed next. They believed a prisoner who had committed one of the worst crimes would be next in line. 13 of the Om Shinrikyo believers had already been executed 4 years prior during the 2018 World Cup game in Russia. Maybe it'll be Tomohiro Kato, they whispered amongst themselves. If you've never heard of Om Shinrikyo, the Doomsday Cult, and Tomohiro Kato, who committed the Akihabara massacre, the next 2 videos will be about them and their crimes, so make sure to come back and check them out. The officers' premonitions proved to be correct. Tomohiro Kato, aged 39, was the one who got executed on July 26, 2022. He was handed the death sentence in February 2015. When a person receives the death sentence, the public prosecutor's office has to send an application for it to the Minister of Justice no later than 4 months after the conviction. Although the criminal procedure law states that the execution must occur within 6 months, this is rarely the case. For Tomohiro Kato, more than 7 long years had passed since he was incarcerated. On July 22, 2022, 4 days before the execution, the Minister of Justice issued an order based on the draft of the execution order from the Criminal Bureau of the Ministry of Justice. The chief prosecutor then commanded the chief of the Tokyo Detention Center to execute Tomohiro Kato's death penalty on Tuesday, July 26th. The Tokyo Detention Center had to hurry once getting this order. They had to obtain a coffin, set up the rope used for the execution, inspect all equipment, go over the manual, do dry runs, and in this way make doubly sure that everything was working correctly and that things would go smoothly on the fateful day. Carrying out an execution is by far the most stressful and difficult day for those working at the detention center. Failure is not an option. Because it requires skill and expertise, there is a special group called the Guard. It consists of around 15 people and includes the chief warden and the deputy warden. They're all directly involved in the daily treatment of the death row inmates, such as exercise and bathing, and they exchange words every day. When inmates go in and out of their cells, their clothes are checked and their physical examinations are conducted by the team. They actually have a very personal relationship with the death row inmates. Prison officers belonging to the guard are involved in all executions, but their duties on the day are as follows. 1. Take them from their cell to the execution chamber. 2. Standing with the inmate at the time when they're told that they will be executed on that day. 3. Handcuff them, tie a white cloth over their face, help them stand on the footstool, tie their legs together, and finally put the noose around their neck. 4. When the inmate is pronounced dead, untie the rope, bathe them after the autopsy, dress them in an attire according to their religion, and put them in a coffin. 5. Be present at their wake and funeral. 6. Load the coffin into a hearse. 7. Line up and see the body off with a salute. It is important to note that 3 prison officers press buttons at the same time to execute prisoners. To reduce mental stress, they do not know which button is the actual switch that opens the trapdoor. Although it's their duty, it goes without saying how much mental distress it likely is to take such an active part in extinguishing someone else's life. The Japan Federation of Bar Associations has the abolition of the death penalty as one of its activities and actively supports death row inmates' requests for retrials, focusing on the provision that prohibits executions during retrials. As of February 28, 2023, there are 106 death row inmates, 61 of whom are currently requesting a retrial. In the past, prisoners on death row who were accused of wrongful conviction did not appeal for retrials, so prison staff were able to predict the order of executions to some extent. Now, however, it has become completely unpredictable. The law states that the death penalty must be carried out privately and in secret. Currently, death row inmates are taken from their cells to the instruction room adjacent to the execution site 1 hour before the scheduled execution time, and the warden or his deputy conducts personal questioning based on the execution order, and they're told after this that they will be executed. Until about 50 years ago, the announcement was made a day or two before, giving families an opportunity to meet and say goodbye. At that time, the treatment of death row inmates was considered the most important task at the detention center, and the idea of correctional treatment was that if the death row inmates were not executed after they repented and reflected on their crimes, they would feel remorse for the victims and their families. Death row inmates were treated in groups, provided with recreation, cultural activities, and emotional education, and were given individual guidance to encourage self-reflection. The warden also sought to understand the feelings of death row inmates by providing opportunities for direct dialogue with them. In November 2021, 2 death row inmates ordered the government to pay a total of approximately 20 million yen or $150,000 in compensation for their mental suffering, arguing that the practice of notifying death row inmates on the day of their execution violates the Constitution and is inhumane. The company filed a lawsuit with the Osaka District Court. As evidence on the plaintiff's side, an audio tape of the death penalty records from the Osaka Detention Center was submitted. It was a secret recording of the exchanges that took place in the warden's office in February 1955, 3 days before the execution, from the time the execution was announced until death. At the time, Congress was about to submit a bill to abolish the death penalty, and the debate on the death penalty was about to rise. The head of the detention center, Sakuro Tamai, who attended 46 executions during his 6 years in office, ordered the head of the education division to record the conversations, saying that this was the last opportunity for him to make a recording to publicize the reality of the death penalty before leaving office. The details of the tape are as follows. The edited tape, which lasted about 1 hour and 40 minutes, was left with the warden's family. This is a valuable record that shows how a death row inmate says his final farewell to his relatives and fellow death row inmates and the process leading up to his execution. This is different from the current operation where notices are announced just hours in advance, and it makes us think about how executions should be carried out. On the morning of February 9th, 1955, a male death row inmate in his 30s was brought to the warden's office by Mr. Tamae, who said, "Your plea for a pardon has been declined, and you will hereby receive an execution order. I'm truly sorry, but this is unavoidable." According to the audio, the man committed a robbery with two of his associates in 1946 and shot and killed a police officer who arrived at the scene. The death penalty was confirmed by the Supreme Court in 1950. On the day he received his execution date, his sister came from Mie Prefecture to see him. The staff member urged the man, "You have today and tomorrow to spend time with her, so make sure you say everything you need to." His older sister said, "Your boy is graduating from middle school this year," referring to the man's eldest son who she had been raising since he went to prison. In the afternoon, a farewell tea party was held with other death row inmates. Apparently, the man was very calm, which made everybody feel a little bit better. The man said of his execution, "Really, you should have done it sooner," and he began to sing a popular wartime song. That night, the man was only able to sleep for 4.5 hours. After the haiku meeting held in the afternoon, he was able to see his sister for the last time. He's heard saying, "Well then, sister, thank you for your time. Please give my regards to Mum, and please take care of the children and my wife as well." He says to his older sister, who is sobbing uncontrollably, "Stop crying. Let's say our final goodbyes with a smile." On the 11th, the day of the execution, the man gives his final goodbyes to the remaining death row inmates. Afterwards, a staff member asked, "I know it's almost time, but could you please tell me what you're thinking about right now?" The inmate replies, "I want to see my dead father, and I know it's too late, but I wish I hadn't committed such a horrible and stupid crime." The scene shifts to the execution site. When asked, "Is there anything you've forgotten to say?" the man thanks the warden for everything he did and tried to do for him. His last words were, "Thank you very much." Afterwards, while the prayers echoed in the background, the floorboards opened and there was a banging sound which was most likely due to the sound of the fall. The execution ends with the medical officer's report. Execution at 2:59, 14 minutes and 2 seconds. It's over. Part of this audio was released at a rally held by Forum 90 in Tokyo on October 9th, the day before World Day Abolition of the Death Penalty. The landscape surrounding executions today is likely to be vastly different from what it was 67 years ago. For the last 50 years, execution notices have been announced on the same day. Japan is one of the only first world nations that still have the death penalty by hanging. Those who are critical of this procedure base their reasoning on the fact that it is inhumane. This is completely understandable, as it took the man who was recorded in this audio 14 minutes and 2 seconds to pass away. Mr. Sakamoto says, "The officers belonging to the guard have the closest relationship to the death row inmates, and yet they're in charge of walking them to the execution site, putting handcuffs on them and placing the noose around their neck. And after the execution, they're in charge of bathing them and placing them in the coffin. You have no idea the mental anguish and the heartbreak that they experience being in that position." In 1970, the treatment of death row inmates was changed from group treatment to single treatment. As a result, death row inmates were forced to live a solitary life and were no longer allowed to work together. At the same time, when notifications were done a day or two before, turned into on-the-day notices. This was because at that time, a large number of suspects had been arrested in cases committed by extremist groups. Due to the influx of these inmates and their rebellious attitudes, the officers no longer had enough time to spend it on death row inmates. To prevent escapes and suicides, they are monitored 24 hours a day by a camera on the ceiling. However, in 2018, a lawsuit filed by an inmate in Kumamoto prison claimed that the surveillance cameras in his cell were a violation of his privacy, and the Kumamoto District Court sought compensation from the government. In response to this lawsuit, a prison official said, "Death row inmates must be put to death no matter what, so they must be kept in good physical and mental health. I think surveillance cameras are necessary for that purpose." There have been several lawsuits in the past claiming that hanging is a cruel punishment and unconstitutional, but all cases have been ruled constitutional. This method of execution has not changed since 1873. While the United States has switched to electric chairs, gas chambers, and lethal injection, and Thailand has also switched from a firing squad to lethal injection, Japan has never considered changing its execution method. The reality is that only about 1% of criminals who commit murders are sentenced to death. This is despite the fact that 99% of the victims' families wanted capital punishment. This is because judges are bound by precedents that set strict standards for sentencing individuals to death. The number of victims, the manner of the crime, etc. are widely recognized, and it is said that some will commit an indiscriminate mass murder with the hope of receiving the death penalty. It can be said that the death penalty system does not deter crime, but rather induces serious murders. When discussing the preservation and abolition of the death penalty, the conclusion is that it should be retained based on public opinion poll results and the feelings of victims' families, but there's a discrepancy with reality. Many of the murderers sentenced to prison repent and serve their sentences while in prison, and it's true that some of them have offered to compensate their families with the bounty they earned from their prison work. In the Cabinet Office's Awareness Survey on the Death Penalty System, which is conducted every 5 years, more than 80% of the respondents approve of the death penalty since 2004. Therefore, it seems that capital punishment will continue in Japan. To finish off this video, let me just give you something to think about. The audio recording described earlier where a young man committed a stupid crime of burglary and ended up killing a police officer who arrived on the scene was given the death sentence. Reading his story was heartbreaking. However, it's hard to fathom anyone feeling sorry for people like Tsutomu Miyazaki, for example, who murdered, molested, and cannibalized 4 young girls between the ages of 4 and 7. Tell me, if you were an officer who worked every single day with death row inmates, do you think you could ever feel sorry for individuals who have committed such a heinous crime? Let me know in the comments below. That's it from me today, guys. As I said, this was a dark and heavy episode. Make sure to take some time today to do something fun and get your mind off of this topic. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more creepy stories from Japan. See you again next time. Cheers.